Good afternoon, everybody. All right, I've never done this in 12 minutes. There we go. Perfect. Okay. Look, this is a very comprehensive a PowerPoint, but I'm just going to breeze through it very quickly and hit the main points. But it is a long one because I think it'll serve as a great resource to understand two big topics we're going to talk about. And when we hit the 2-minute warning, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Jason to talk about the model regs. All right, so I'm going to talk primarily about a paper that I authored, and with Jason, but with the funding from the U.S. Department of Transportation. It's called Accessible Transportation Reform, Transforming the Public Paratransit, Private and Private Hire Ground Transportation, merging them together for all practical purposes. It's undergoing peer review at the Transportation Research Board, and it was funded by the U.S. DOT. So real quickly, my many hats. I was the commissioner, or as you would say, minister of taxis forever in New York City. I worked for the government for 16 years, for Mayors Giuliani, Bloomberg, and I'm still involved on Mayor de Blasio's transition team, helping pick the new taxi commissioner and the new DOT commissioner and others. I'm a lawyer. I'm a transportation lawyer. That's some of what I do. My primary job is I'm a distinguished lecturer. I teach and do research in transportation at the City University of New York. We're a U.S. DOT designated entity that does all the transportation funding and research in New York, New Jersey, and Puerto Rico. I'm also volunteer pro bono president for the IATR, the International Association of Transport Regulators. We are a group of taxi commissioners, a nonprofit from all over the world, and we do advocacy and educational activities and hold conferences. Jason is the former commissioner for the Mayor's Office of People with Disabilities under Mayor Bloomberg. He's also counsel in my law firm now. We work together on not just the paper, but on the model regulations. So in a nutshell, ParaTransit Systems in the U.S. were born out of the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's too expensive to make the subways, I apologize, my back, too expensive to make the subways accessible. So with a variety of different lawsuits and legislation and regulations, we ended up with multi-passenger vans crisscrossing the city, not just in New York, but all over the country. An incredibly inefficient system, in my view, that is completely broken. Taxis. It's always been a struggle with accessible taxi cabs. There's been a lot of headway that's been made. The industry has typically resisted change. Now, the new entrants into the market, you may have heard of Uber and Lyft. They are hostile towards the accessibility concept. And however, a silver lining in the cloud, so to speak, is that I believe this is an opportunity, because of the disruption in the market, for there to be positive change for accessibility. And I'll explain what that is. Millions, and if not billions of dollars in taxpayer money is being spent on a heavily subsidized multi-passenger van service that takes disabled individuals across New York City, and this is the same for many different municipalities around the country. In fact, in the U.S., there's no one agency that deals with all of this. That's another problem. There are human resources agencies, MTAs, or transportation authorities. The money is scattered. There's no one direction or authority to get it done. There are many agencies involved: DOT, Department of Transportation, Taxi and Limousine Commission. Just in New York, there are about 5 or 6 agencies that are involved in this process. There are silos of service, and there's no communication at all, in my opinion. And if any communication takes place between them, it's not meaningful. We need uniformity. We need reform desperately. And we have some ideas on how to do that. Of course, we use New York City as a case study. The reason why, just look at the sheer numbers. 60% of the passenger car service industry in North America is in New York City, and over 30% of the industry worldwide. What really started something known as the Accessible Dispatch Program, which is a blueprint for reform, is my finding out that there was a $60 million contract for a limo company to pick up disabled passengers who were stranded on the street corner when Access-A-Ride vans didn't pick them up. I thought that was outrageous. I told the CEO of the transit agency, who was a friend of mine, about it. We had a meeting, and we started to fix it. And lo and behold, we did a pilot program, which we started called the Accessible Dispatch Program. After the pilot was concluded, it worked so well that it was adopted in its entirety by the City of New York. We used the 311 information hotline to dispatch calls to accessible individuals by taxi cabs. And we also started a program involving brokers, okay, where the MTA, the public transit agency, enters into a contract with one or more entities that provide service point-to-point by taxis and sedans in lieu of the private passenger vans. So there are 84,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide spewed into the air as a result of the Accessoride program. Bottom line is, to just sum it up, the study basically says it's inefficient to have a multi-passenger van that carries on average 1.5 disabled individuals per trip when it could seat up to 6 or 8, crisscrossing the city, making pollution, and depending on the luck of the draw, you could either be lucky and get to your destination in 15 minutes, or if you're grouped up with other passengers, it could take you 2 hours. That needs to change. And what we're suggesting is that we basically do a number of things, but primarily use taxis and limos to do point-to-point service per passenger, which only costs about $12 to $15 per ride. The cost for Accessoride now is $60 per trip per person. The savings is, in addition to helping the environment and saving all of this carbon dioxide and harmful emissions, and a 400% increase in fuel efficiency by using these smaller vehicles. In addition to that, we're going to save a heck of a lot of money. Now, here are our recommendations. We need to basically redo this entire system. We need to use the green borough cabs in the outskirts of the borough. We need to use sedans and taxis, and we can convert the entire Accessoride program into one that is run by taxis and sedans, and basically just use, through the brokerage model, the vans for feeder services. Okay, feeder services running in routes that go to and from mass transit hubs for common destinations. We need to replace the vehicles, and we need to use more brokerage contracts. So we need to use technology. Okay, we need to have a smartphone app for accessible transportation, public and private. Or the apps that are out there need to have an option that says, I want an accessible vehicle. When you open up Uber, it says black car, Uber Black, sedan. It doesn't say anything about accessibility. In fact, they've resisted it. Okay, the most outrageous thing that I saw in the whole disruption movement in the United States was when in Seattle, Washington, they basically said, we don't do accessibility. That's what the taxis should do. We don't want any part of it, and we'll be willing to pay up to $500,000 a year just for the taxi cabs to deal with it. Meanwhile, they're putting the cab business out of business by violating the laws left and right. However, like I said, the positive thing is that every legislator is getting thousands and thousands of political contributions and is being manipulated to change the laws to accommodate these apps, which are nothing short of just an unlicensed transportation service. However, the good news is that the industry, which usually fights accessibility, is now saying, using it as a sword and a shield, saying to the legislators, okay, these guys don't do accessible service. You need to fix that. So what we're seeing now is legislation in Colorado and Washington and California and in Illinois and D.C. that are now addressing the accessibility issue. So I think it's actually a positive thing. We need to monitor emissions and where these cars are going. It could all be done through onboard diagnostics technology and a lockbox. We need to take all the money that we save, which is $95 million annually in New York City alone. Just the wasted money on a failed Accessoride system. We could save that much money, and could you imagine what we could do with that? So in conclusion, we need to save the taxpayers' money, help the environment. We need to basically put cabs and sedans in its place. And the way that we do this is through a project which I'm going to bring Jason up to very briefly talk about, called the Model Regulations for Accessibility, that the ITR has developed and proposed, and he's going to talk about it real quickly and hit the main points, and we can share it with you afterwards. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Let me just start by saying that this project, the Model Regulations, was a vision of Matt. Matt and I worked together in city government a long time ago. He brought me aboard for this project, and we really are hopeful that this is going to lead to increase accessibility around the world for taxi cabs and for hire vehicles. So what I did was I put together a group of about 30 regulators from around the world, including Australia, Canada, United States, in order to come together to put together best practices regarding what are the best things about different taxi regulations around the world that talk about accessibility. And because some of them have some really good stuff, but others leave out things, such as some regulations don't talk about blind and low vision, deaf, hearing loss people. Others deal more with infrastructure and not so much the vehicle itself. So we really cherry-picked. And actually, one of the documents that we used was the Canadian Standards Association document about accessible vehicles, which was very helpful. So the model regs, well, you know, the reason why we did it, we want to address, we want to have a cohesive standard, address financial implications, and codify the best practices. These are the 5 things that the regs talk about. Vehicle accessibility, what the vehicle itself looks like. We're talking about anything from lights inside the vehicle to how much weight ramps should be able to hold, to anything that you can think of to make it maximum, provide maximum accessibility within the vehicle. Driver training. Driver training is absolutely key. One of the problems that we've had in New York City and pretty much everywhere else in the world are drivers that don't know how to do simple things like tie down a wheelchair passenger. Plus, drivers sometimes don't even want to have to deal with it. So we made sure that we were very all-encompassing with what driver training should have in terms of the regulations. One of the things we didn't want to do was provide an alternative to providing an accessible vehicle. However, in our experience, we found that with the accessible dispatch program that Matt was talking about earlier, and it's been done elsewhere, such as Chicago, when you bring in something like that, it actually leads to more accessible vehicles. It shows the demand, it shows that people with disabilities want to use taxis, so we left that window open for municipalities to create such a dispatch program, because it will then eventually lead to more vehicles, and eventually we could take that out once an ideal world happens. And then the financing model that we talked about, and then there's other miscellaneous provisions. And then let me just, I'm just going to just show you real quick. We have a statement of basis and purpose, just like any other regulations would have. Then we have definitions, like any regulations would have. And we really were careful to cover as much as we could. You can just see, just really quick, what the vehicles will have, you know, free of projections, floor covering, nosings, capability of transfer. And it just goes on, and then we get to the dispatch, and then we get to the driver vetting and training, the funding, the lockbox that Matt was talking about, and then there's other provisions, such as one thing that I added, something about along the lines of sometimes taxis can only take, let's say, 4 passengers, and if you're in a wheelchair and you're traveling with a family of 4, it shouldn't be that you should pay for 2 taxis. So one of the things that we came up with is there should be 1 fare for 2. So anyway, those are the regs. I invite you to, they're on the IATR website, and if you talk to Matt or myself offline, we can get you a copy. And we're still taking comments. It's a living document. We're taking comments until December 22nd, I believe it is, and we've actually formed a stakeholder committee that advocates are involved in, and people with disabilities who are going to be giving their comments. So it's a working document. We're hoping it's finalized by next year, so everyone's happy with it, and I can tell you that I'm personally proud of it, and I want to thank Matt for bringing me on board and having the vision to do it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Matt and Jason.
Question for Tracy and Matthew on the financing model for the medallion owners or the license owners to purchase the accessible vehicles. So what is the model currently in place right now to enable these owners to actually purchase those vehicles?
I'll speak to mine.
Thank you.
So City of Toronto does not sell taxi cab licenses. We don't sell medallions. This is where the systems differ. The taxi cab licenses are issued by the city, or as I mentioned earlier, because they're a limited number, existing taxi cab license holder may sell their cab, and as long as they meet the regulations, the license will be transferred to them. So the operator of the taxi cab is solely responsible for the purchase of the vehicle, the equipment in the vehicle to to meet our regulations. When we did this review, we had a taxi guru. He's kind of a nutty professor guy, wonderful gentleman, who lives, sleeps, and breathes taxis, but did a review on vehicle types that are out there. So, you know, the accessible vehicle, or those that, especially the conversions, is marginally higher price to put on the road. But what we have done is extended the lifespan of that vehicle. And what also factors in is all this currently unmet demand and the opportunity that having this type of vehicle will present to the operators. So when he did that assessment, we saw over time that it's not a more expensive venue for the operators themselves. So we do not currently have any grant or financing programs in the City of Toronto. Quite frankly, I don't know where that may get to with the provincial government or any other government going forward. The regulation is if you operate a business in the City of Toronto and the province of Ontario, the business operator is responsible for ensuring that that business is accessible. And in this context, that includes taxi cab service. So that's Toronto.
In New York, there is a medallion system. The way it works is when you add new medallions to the fleet, the city sells them, the city gets the money, but very different from Toronto in many ways. The industry owners own the medallion. The city has nothing to do with it after that. We collect the tax. Years ago, when we were trying to encourage alternative fuel vehicles and wheelchair accessible vehicles, when we did auctions that brought in about $200 million during my tenure, we set aside by law a certain number of dedicated wheelchair accessible medallions. That was the beginning. Then what happened is there were lawsuits. There was the ability to try to get green cabs in the outer boroughs. It ended up at the state legislature, and they came up with a livery street hail law which provides for a grant program, and also which mandates that basically thousands of vehicles on the green cab on the yellow side for new medallion sales are going to hit the road. So half the fleet is going to be wheelchair accessible, but a large portion of that is going to be well before 2020. It's going, in the slide, the exact numbers are there, but that's what it's going to be. So long story short, the financing also comes to pay for the accessible dispatch system from a surcharge that's been added to the fare for passengers. But, I mean, the big issue that I have personally is, and I've been in government for 16 years, everybody complains. Okay, the disability community complains, the industry complains, we can't afford it, but no one comes up with solutions. We have a solution here. The solution is, and at least in America, is that you fix both the public and private industry by just cutting out the millions and millions and millions of dollars of waste. A small portion of what we can save annually can make every cab accessible in the United States overnight. And number two, hundreds of millions of dollars are being funneled into Silicon Valley to deregulate the industry with Uber and Lyft and these other companies, and they have absolutely no commitment to this cause, have been openly hostile to accessibility, and they could take a sliver of the money that they're paying on lawyers and lobbyists and give it to this system. So those are the two big things. But on a positive note, to end on a positive note, this is primarily a tourism-oriented conference, and I think all of us know that in big cities and small cities around the world, everyone and every mayor is looking to attract big events. The taxi driver is the first and the last face that you see at the airports. If your taxi system and black car system is horrible, then you're not going to be able to bid on the Pan Games, you're not going to be able to bid on the World Cup or anything. And we saw this firsthand when we lost the Olympics in New York. But now, every mayor is looking to make, for tourism and other general well-being purposes, tourism, reasons, accessibility, better cars, and just better service in general. And then you have these companies that come along that basically provide more quick and prompt service, but it's not this, it's basically just using inaccessible limos right now. It's not better. Quicker doesn't mean better. And I think we have a tremendous opportunity here with the disruption that's going on and with this solution. Let's take the model regs, work with Carol. Anyone who wants to be on the stakeholder committee, contact Jason and I. We already have many regulators as a result of our conference in New Orleans last year that are going to be actually implementing these regs. The blueprint is there. The actual language is there. Everything that you need to do to choose from the menu is there. The solution, which APTA, the American Public Transit Association, and other mass transit, they want this solution. They know that the system stinks. They know that they're losing money, and they have budgetary constraints. This solves a lot of people's problems We're going to be here at ITR in Montreal next September. We're going to continue the discussion. Hopefully have some of the panelists that are here join us to speak as well. And we're going to finalize our model regs and put an implementation plan to make them a reality. And we can do that now with the help of stakeholders like the tourism community, the disability advocates, and various government officials that are outside the world that we live in here as transportation regulators.